Hi, I'm Mark Danielson. We're going to talk about this Aerostar today. It's kind of an unusual airplane. There are only 12 of them made, and this is number 1 out of those. And there's only 8 of them left, unfortunately. It's basically a Mooney M20F. It's 1971. The Aerostar Corporation bought Mooney for 1 year. And after they built these, they shut the company down again, and nothing was built for a couple of years. So it's kind of an interesting airplane. It still has a 200 horsepower IO360A1A engine in there, and of course that's based at 2,700 RPM. But I normally cruise at about 70% power and 152 miles an hour indicated, burning 8.5 gallons an hour. So it's a pretty efficient little airplane. There's a lot of interesting things about the Mooney. This particular one had a speed mod that filled in this gap right here. The original ones, that was all open, and that's a lot of drag on the airplane. Miles per hour wise, I don't know how much it actually sped it up, but it makes a big difference. It has a constant speed prop, which allows me to cruise at 2,400 RPM as opposed to the 2,700 RPM. It's quieter, more efficient. And one of the things that I just added in here was this oil preheating system, which is a Reich system. It has heating rings around each cylinder, and it's got some heating pads underneath the engine. And in the cold climate, that makes it pretty nice. I don't have to waste any gas warming it up. Just take time to align it. Another thing that's kind of interesting about the Moonies is they have a induction door here. So when you have clean air, normally after you've taken off in clean air, you can open that up and pick up about 1 inch of manifold pressure, which gives you a little bit more horsepower while you're cruising. And another thing that's unique on the Moonies is they don't have the hydraulics for dampeners. They use all these rubber donuts all the way around. And that makes it both good and bad. If you do a normal landing, it's good. If you do a bad landing, then it kind of tends to bounce you. So if you're flying a normal stabilized approach, that isn't any problem. And if you look at the gear doors, they look crooked, but it's just the way that the airplane is designed because of the exhaust and so forth. It seals up that nose gear, but it does have a bulb that sticks out the bottom, so it's not a complete flush, but it does completely close the gear in. Up here, this is just your air cooler or air intake, I should say, with a filter that's a real sticky thing. And then you have your cowl flaps right here that you normally only open on the ground, but there's a lot of times in the summertime when you have to open them because it's too hot. So you can manage your air temperature inside the engine by doing that. And it picks up a little bit of airspeed when you close those up. So walking around the rest of the airplane, a lot of people have modified Moonies for speed, and one of the things that they've done on a lot of the older airplanes is put on what they call a speed mod windshield, which started with the J model, the 201. And I didn't do that because number one, I wanted to keep this airplane as original as I could on the outside, but this is an Avionics Access Bay right here. And when you want to get in and work on the avionics, they can just pull these panels off and it's wide open, which is pretty nice. Some of the antennas up here, this has a couple of GPSs for the avionics that are in there now, and that works out quite well. One of the other things that I like on the Mooney are the fuel gauges on the outside, and that's a really good starting point because you can verify what you have on the inside fuel gauges. These stickers make sure that you're putting in the right gas, and sometimes you have a turbo airplane like this, turbocharged airplane. People mistake it as a turbo airplane, as in a jet, and they might put in the wrong fuel, and that will kill you. Go around here, we have a heated pitot tube, and we're not going to fly this in icing conditions, but if you go through the clouds, you always want to have that thing on. because that's where your airspeed indication is going to come from. Later Moonies actually put in a different wingtip here, which creates a little bit more lift and a little less drag. But this is the way it's designed, just a flat wingtip. Now, one of the Moonies' best qualities is how clean everything is. You can see there are no screws on the top of the wing whatsoever. Your access panels are all on the bottom. The total flight control movement, because it's so smooth, is from here to here, which is about half of what you're going to find on your Pipers and Cessnas. And it's kind of nice in the cockpit because you're not banging anybody's knees when you're flying the controls. And the flaps are not particularly wide, but you can see that the span goes all the way down to here. So they're very effective. The landing gear itself has, again, the donuts that we talked about, like on the nose gear, and this retracts where part of the wheel is still exposed, and that's fine. The newer models completely close that up for a little bit better performance. I don't think it makes that much difference. But the big thing about the landing gear on the Moonies, and of course this Aerostar, is how quickly they retract, and it affects the way that I fly the airplane. Because normally in a single engine airplane, you're going to leave the landing gear down until the runway is no longer usable. But because the landing gear goes up, I fly it more like I do a twin engine airplane, where I want the gear up in case I lose one engine. And I know that I can put the gear back down, because it's literally about a second and a half before it's down and locked. I don't know of any other airplane that has the gear that retracts and lowers as quickly as this. And we can show you that later. This is a really nice access door. The battery's behind here, the ELT is behind here, and it's very cavernous. You can literally have access for everything back here for an inspection. It works out really well. Another thing on the Mooney that's kind of nice is this vent up here is for the overhead vents that are in the cockpit. So you can get airflow not only from the sides, but you can get it from the top. Probably one of the more interesting things about Moonies is they made the tail backwards. You compare that to any other airplane and it's got the sweep in the wrong direction. But this entire section of the tail, between the horizontal stabilizer and the vertical stabilizer, actually moves when you trim the airplane. So you change the incidence on this whole section is going to go back or it's going to go forward. And that's why this fairing is right here. The Aerostar has this little decorative knob. It's not a radar, it's not functional, it's purely aesthetics. And that was Aerostar's signature, trying to make it a little bit different from what the Mooney had before. And they carried that out with this stinger tail, which is this section. And if you were to take this off, you'd still have a Mooney tail, but it extends it about this far. It doesn't serve any purpose other than it looks pretty, or you hate it, one or the other. Some people like it, some people don't. There's actually there was a spare Aerostar section that was put on a standard Mooney, and that was done by Lake Aero Style out in Clear Lake, California. So there is a fake Aerostar out there, but I don't think they have the bulb up on the top. One of the things that Mooney has done very recently is they put a second door on, and that is really a good asset because you only have this one door for getting in and out, and it's kind of a poor design in my opinion, because it has a clamshell up on the top. It doesn't have a second lever like on a Piper. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but this clamshell actually just opens up. You can show it this way here. See that? So that opens up and it has to grip this pin in the top. And of course you have another pin here which is related to that. So you have the two pins that are holding the door in, but you can't slam this door like on a Piper. You have to be real careful on that. Inside the aircraft, the Mooney is very cavernous because the seats are all the way back. If you look inside here, the rudder pedals are way up there, and you actually sit very close to the flight controls, which may be a little uncomfortable for some people, but once you're in it, it's like being in a sports car. And you have a fuel control selector valve down here, which is not a particularly good place. I have a little tool right here that I can reach down and switch it like that, and that saves me from breaking my back because it's a little bit tight in flight. You also have a drain right here, so when you pull this up, you're going through the gasculator, draining it down at the lowest point, so if there's any water that's in there, you can get rid of that. This is not a standard cockpit for a Mooney or for an Aerostar. Everything has been redone. This originally had all round dials in there, and it's all glass now. And what we did was we made this sectionalized so that we could pull this whole area out in order to be able to work on the avionics, and combine that with the access in the panels outside. It makes it very simple. We have a standby attitude indicator here, which is actually a 4-in-1 instrument, and you can see it's got 100% battery life. That's your backup on there. And this is the engine gauge and fuel gauges and amperage, volts, and you have a lot of other features that you can step through in order to give you what your cylinders are doing. All of these other instruments take about 3 minutes to boot up, but between that and what I have on the iPad, everything that I ever needed to know about flying I can get instantly, and if I ever got lost, I deserve to be shot. This will be a moving map over here. This is a moving map. This actually shows my arrival into prop wash this morning. It tracks everything, keeps me clear. You can see up here we have a turn and slip indication. You have your altitude, you'll have airspeed over here. This has synthetic vision once everything is aligned, and that's a nice feature. And more importantly, this map has terrain on there, which gives you warnings. I have it set up so that I have terrain, traffic. I have traffic on different scales. When these align, I can show the traffic in right here. That's a 12-mile scale. That's a 5-mile scale. And I have a 15-mile scale. You can see all the traffic that's around us here at prop wash. And we'll have the synthetic vision up here in a couple of minutes. All of these gauges are controlled by these few switches, and the ones down here, I have a pulse light on the landing gear, or landing light, and the boost pump, and the anti-collision light, which right now is a strobe light. And then we got the nav lights, Pitot heat, If I wanted the landing light on steady, then I would just use this switch. But if it's on pulse, I just use this switch. You can see right now, this is the little boost door that I was showing you outside. So it shows that it's open or partially open. Now it's off. So here's the synthetic vision. And if we were on a runway that was recognized in the database, then it's going to show me the concrete or the asphalt. It'll show me the numbers. I normally fly it in this mode because it gives me a better idea. But I like this feature because it shows me where the traffic actually is, and I can back that up with what I'm showing on here and here and here and here, and I've got a pretty good idea. But the biggest thing that you got to realize is that this traffic that's showing up is only traffic that shows up on transponders. That's not actually what's outside. There's planes that are flying out of here that have none of that in. They may not even have an electrical system, so you have to still look outside. You can see these shut down in progress. They'll shut down on their own after I turn the switches off, but if I wanted to keep the power on them and go to the battery power, I just have to punch a button. This thing says the same thing: power down, push to cancel. And now they're all out. So if I don't see those things, then I don't have a backup battery, and that's pretty important. The way we laid the panel out on the circuit breakers, there's only one breaker that's particularly important to me, and that's this landing gear. Because if I have a landing gear problem, I have to pull the circuit breaker, and then I push this forward and I crank the landing gear down. And it's about 52 cranks in order to get it down. So you have to allow a little bit of time to do that. But even if it was dark or smoky or whatever, I could pull that circuit breaker. That's why it has a collar on there. If I feel, I can tell that that's the one that I need. And then I can do that. I've got a couple of USB plugs over here, which I power into another GPS and this iPad. And on this side, I have a regular cigar lighter, which I can power anything, or I can plug in one of the cigar lighter USB plugs that has 2 outlets on it. If I was in a normal seating position, it'll take me a second to get up there because I got all the stuff in the way. And because we're sitting at an angle in the back, it's not a graceful thing to do. But I'll show you where I normally sit. And I look down at the notch and I hear that click. I know that it's locked in. And by the way, this right down here is a landing gear, manual landing gear indicator. And that's really good because if this light doesn't work for whatever reason, I can always look down here, and I do anyway. I make sure that the gear is actually down. This is our trim indicator, and rolling this down, I've never gotten any lower than that in flight. It just doesn't do it. But in a normal landing configuration, it's going to be way up, and you can look at the tail. Go ahead and look at the tail back there. You can see how the whole thing is moving.
I'm not going to be able to tell on this lens though. It's too wide angle.
This is a normal position for landing. It's not all the way up, but it's pretty close, and that's with full flaps. And if I'm not in that position, the airplane's not going to fly itself, and that's always the goal, is to have the airplane so that it can fly hands off. And that's about 80 miles an hour for my final approach. I cross the fence at about 75 miles an hour and then hold it in the flare. These levers here, this of course is your Mixture control, that's what's going to shut the engine fuel off or apply it. This is the propeller control, that's control the RPM we talked about. And this is the throttle. And normally, they're going to look in flight about like that. So that's about 70% power that I normally fly with, and that's about 8.5 gallons an hour. That's a long way back, and one of the nice features that I can look on this EDM 900 here, and it'll show me Richa peak or Lena peak, so I can mechanically work this so that I'm looking at this and it'll give me the best fuel flow. There's no point. Actually, it's surprising if you have more gas. Let's say that I'm up here and I'm burning 10 gallons per hour, my cylinder head temperature is going to be a lot hotter than it would be that I'm back here at optimum at about 8.5 an hour. This right here is just a knob for Titan. That's my flap control. And in the back, you can see the difference between the seats on how much room is actually back there. It's quite comfortable if you have a few people, and the rear seats actually do recline. So that's kind of a nice thing. But you may have 4 seats, but that doesn't mean that you can take 4 people in it. You have to decide whether you're going to take fuel or whether you're going to take people, because it all comes out to weight. You can haul about 1,000 pounds between the fuel and people, and it's a real trade-off. So as a 2-seat, it's a great cross-country airplane. As a 4-seat, it's a very local airplane. It'll hold 64 gallons, and that's a lot of weight when you figure it out math-wise. Right now I normally keep it at about 50 gallons, 25 per side, and that gives me the option of taking some other people with me if I want to go somewhere. This airplane has a 3-point shoulder harness system, pretty much like in the old cars, and it's the only seatbelt shoulder harness system that's authorized for this airplane. Remember, it's a certified airplane, so you have to do everything according to the FAA rules. If it was an experimental airplane, we could do a lot of other different things. And the rear seats don't have any place that they can hook them up to, so there aren't any in there. But one of the things that's unique to the Moonies is that they're made out of steel fuselage truss, just the same as some of the old tube and fabric airplanes. And that provides a very, very strong fuselage. And the wing itself is a one-piece wing. So you mate the two of them together like you do on a P-51, you end up with a really strong airplane. And there has never been a single Mooney wing failure in the history of the Mooney, which goes back to, I believe, 53. So that's a pretty good thing. Right over here we have, these are their overhead vents we were talking about, and this lever is controlling that little vent on the outside that we talked about, so that'll decide whether you get airflow out of here or not. And we just have some speakers and a light for night flying. I don't fly it at night. I have flown at one leg at night, but the deer are out, and I prefer not to land on top of the deer where I live. All of the interior was redone, but the panels themselves, they're new panels, but they're the same as what came with the airplane. The seats have a slightly different structure. They have a built-in headrest that they didn't have before. It's a very comfortable seat that we have, and that was done here in Fort Worth. But these vents over here, cabin heat. The cabin heat's very effective, but as with anything in a light airplane, you're getting cabin heat from engine source. You have to be concerned about carbon monoxide. So it's always a good idea to keep some cabin vent air on as well. That's about what we got going on in the airplane. Any questions from the audience?